I think most people would agree that justice is a virtue. People should be just. The big question is what actually counts as just and why does it count as just? This question was probably most famously first addressed in The Republic by Plato. The question was raised, what makes a person just? Initially, it's proposed that just is whatever the strongest person says it is. The story of the ring of Gyges is told. Gyges finds a ring that makes him invisible. When he wears it, he then wears it, carries out all sorts of crimes, elevates himself to king of the country. And the question is raised, is this just? And pretty much everybody agrees, no, that's not just. And so Plato says, well, through Socrates, so justice is not what force can get away with. What is justice? Well, Plato spends the rest of the Republic answering that question. A lot of people get confused. They think that the Republic is about how to form a good state. Maybe. But what it's really about is how to form a good soul. Plato draws a parallel between the three classes of people living in the society he's proposing and the three parts of the soul. When we say soul, we're talking about that force which keeps us alive and keeps us working, holds our innermost life together. Okay? Plato, it's not clear just how religious or how conventionally religious anyway he was. So don't get hung up on this use of soul as a religious thing. It's really much more an intellectual creation to explain why there is a central force in us that seems to serve as our motivator and director. Other people may call it will later on. They might call it life force. They might call it energy. We might even call it psyche. I think that is what Plato calls it. Anyway, the point is, this soul has three parts to it. One part, he says, is the appetite. Now, this is the part we share with all other living things. All living things have appetite. They have to consume, they have to excrete, they have to create whatever it is that they do. I mean, flowers and trees, they put down roots, and ants build mounds, and people make pots and jugs, and these things are all the product of appetite. They're the product of consumption. These are what we might think of as the products of a consumer society or an animal's consumption, or bees, honey, and all of it. It's just an expression of appetite. Also a part of the soul, at least the human soul. We don't see this in animals, the vegetative soul, but we do see it in other animals, at least some other animals. And this is the soul, the part of the soul which is filled with passion. It is courage, it is commitment, it is the excitement we bring to a new project, the commitment and long-term energies we put into making a life for ourselves or our family or our world. It's not a rational thing, passion. We may latch on to all sorts of strange things we shouldn't, or perhaps even things we should, but perhaps not for rational reasons. The passions then are about a drive which all animals feel to elevate their station in the world, to promote what they have to a higher level in our environment. Now, the uppermost level of our three-part soul, the final level of our three-part soul, is reason, the intellect. This is the one thing we have all to ourselves that's unique to the human animal. We alone think, we alone reason, we alone engage in meaningful conversation and written communication. We have a long-term ability to remember and to take what we remember and make new information out of it. These are the three parts: appetite, passion, reason. Plato suggests that in the city, in order to call it just, it has to be ruled by the wisest members of the city. If it's ruled by the appetite people, the consumer people, the creator people, the merchant class, it will be all about money, and it won't be about forwarding the city or elevating the conditions in the city. If it's handled only by the passion people, well, the passion people will run off to wars and get involved in contests and competitions that perhaps they haven't prepared adequately for or don't really understand the meaning of. It just won't do. It is the persons who have wisdom, who understand how the world works, how to take knowledge and make it into a better life for everyone involved. This then, when a city is ruled by that kind of person, by his philosopher king, that person really wants to be engaged in the academic life, in the life of thinking, in the life of understanding the world, not ruling people and telling people how to live. We ask them to do that for us because they're the wisest and the best. And so we can count on them to do the job right. But it's not like it's their long-term ambition. We don't see in a proper, just society a class of people who just seek to rule. The only people who come close to that are the people who have passion, who are governed by passion, and those people we definitely don't want in charge. It is the wise we want in charge, and the wise will not seek to rule long-term. There's just no good in it. They want to get back to that understanding of reality that they were engaged in before they were asked to rule. Likewise then, in a just person, we are ruled by our wisdom, by our thought processes. Our courage, our passion is important, but it cannot be more in charge than our reason. Otherwise, we will find ourselves charging into foolhardy situations, taking all kinds of risks we should not take. Neither should our appetite rule. We all know what happens when our appetite rules. We overeat, we indulge, we get engaged in all kinds of situations that are difficult to deal with, and certainly not anything you could describe as just. The passions should rule the appetites. When we behave in a noble, courageous manner, as our passions push us to, we will not pursue appetites in a way that will degrade the body, just as the mighty warriors and athletes and leaders of our passion part of our community will keep the merchant class from degrading itself into all kinds of unfit behavior. The kind of behavior that brings a city to its knees rather than elevates it to its heights. Thus, the right order for justice is wisdom, courage, temperance. When we say temperance here, I'm not talking about abstinence. Plato understands the appetite has its place, and he wants to make sure that it's well taken care of, but not abused, not somehow overused or underused. He doesn't want to see any kind of exploitation of the appetites. The appetites have their place. They should be used properly and efficiently. And if done so, they will promote the growth of the city through the elevating activities of the courage and the passion led by the understanding and wisdom of the intellect. If we have all this in place, if this is what we're doing, then we will be a just city, we will be a just person. If everything is in its place, everything belonging where it is and is where it belongs, Plato says we will have justice. So for Plato, justice produces a well-ordered city, a well-ordered soul. John Stuart Mill is a utilitarian and therefore believes that what is moral is what creates happiness. And happiness comes from pleasure. Doesn't sound a whole lot like what Plato's doing here. And that's true. Mill sees justice's purpose to create an environment where the most happiness can be had. Thus, he offers us two basic principles. One is the rights principle. And the rights principle says you are free to do whatever makes you happy. Well, that sounds good so far. The second half, though, puts a little bit of brakes on that, called the harm principle. And the harm principle says we will have to stop pursuing our pleasure where it causes harm or pain for others. Thus, not all pleasures are endorsed. And that's quite true. You will find a great distinction in the writing of the end of the 18th and beginning of the 19th centuries, a discussion about the difference between liberty and license. License, for most of us, if we are familiar with the idea at all, is just left over in its adjectival form, licentious. Liberty is freedom used well. License is freedom used poorly. When we try to pursue our rights of doing whatever we want and we harm others, well, we're free to do that. Nobody says, because you are free to do it. We can tell you not to do it, but we can't actually make it impossible for you to do. Not really. We can make some limits in terms of laws and restrictions, but at the end of the day, as we all know, if somebody wants to do something wrong, they will. But the harm principle condemns that. And so we don't call it liberty. You don't have the freedom, the liberty to do wrong. But if you do wrong, you are behaving licentiously. You are using your freedom improperly. Thus, the harm principle governs the rights principle. The harm principle points us to liberty and away from license. One of the difficulties here, though, is we need to be careful to protect everyone from the tyranny of the majority and the tyranny of the minority. The majority has to leave doors open. It has to be real harm, in other words. You may not like the idea of pineapple on pizza. This is maybe something you would really be upset about. I happen to like pineapple on pizza. Does it hurt you when I eat pineapple on pizza? No. It maybe is something you don't like, as I say, but you can't force me to do something which isn't in fact protecting you from being harmed. All that's being hurt here is your aesthetic feelings, your taste buds, perhaps. These things don't matter, not compared to my joy in getting my pineapple on my pizza. Contrary-wise, if there is a minority who says, oh, but we love doing this thing, dog fights or any kind of behavior that most people would frown on, it brings us great pleasure. And does it harm you? Well, strictly speaking, no. It harms the animals, but it doesn't harm me personally. Nevertheless, it is a harmful practice. And as such, the fact that the minority says, well, we get pleasure out of it, It doesn't matter. It's just not appropriate. So that's why we have to have a rule of law. We have to find laws that we can all agree on that basically are taking the harm and rights principle and pushing them together and applying them in appropriate situations. Thus, we have to regulate water use or land use, but we can only do it within actual measures of harm and only limiting the right to do what you want when harm can be demonstrated. And then it has to be codified so that it is enforced in a rational, meaningful way. You don't have just groups jumping up and going, oh, no, no, we can't do it this way. No, 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 you have to do it that way. No. The law makes it all balanced, makes it all useful. The last theory of justice I want to take a look at today comes to us from John Rawls. His book, A Theory of Justice, was required reading in the Clinton White House in the 90s. It was an attempt to find a justification for making the world as equal in access, as equal in opportunity as possible. I mean, let's go back to Plato for just a second. You're told what you have to do in Plato. There isn't any choice for you. We don't have to offer you an equal opportunity in any way, shape, or form because you belong where you belong. Shut up, go away, leave us alone. Mill has some interest in making sure everyone gets the pleasure that they need, everyone gets the happiness that they need, but it's not a theory of equality he does it. He does it because that's his principle. Everybody should be as happy as they can be. This idea of equality, of making sure that everyone has more or less the same chance to achieve the same outcomes, isn't entirely happy for either of the other two fellows. Rawls proposes this, as I say, largely as an outcome of the general trend of liberal thinking in the United States in the second half of the 20th century. What he suggests is the key to justice is something he calls the original position. I'm not clear exactly why he chooses those words, because the original position nobody was ever originally in. That is to say, the original position, he says, is when we are behind a veil of ignorance. We have no idea what is considered excellent in our society, who we are in relationship to our society. All we know is that there is a society and it's got certain goals, and we want to be sure everyone has the same access to those goals as everyone else. So as a result, what Rawls is suggesting is that since people will look out for their own best interest, but they don't actually know of a certainty what that best interest is. And I say that because, again, you're supposed to be ignorant as your own physical well-being, your own physical status in the society. You have no idea, in other words, if your race or your color or your gender, your religion, your height, your weight, whatever. You don't know how these are valued by our society. Yours. You know how it's valued in general, but you don't know how yours is valued. Then you'll want to make sure that these principles of access are as aimed at helping the disadvantaged as possible on the off chance you might be one of the disadvantaged. Thus, if you are poor, you'll want to be helped somehow in order to be an equal member of society. Obviously, we're not going to make everyone rich. First of all, mathematically, it just won't work. And I mean that simply in terms of averages. You can do the math all you like, but if you got a room full of billionaires and one millionaire, the millionaire is poor. Because rich is what the guy at the top has. If you're at the bottom, you're poor because you don't have as much as the guy at the top. That's just the way it works. So when we talk about making it equal, we're not talking about making it perfectly the same for everybody. Because we can't, after all. I mean, there are physical attributes we can't change. But what we can do is make sure that the people who need a hand get a hand. You can't reach the shelf at the top, we will supply you with a footstool so you can step up and get to it. You come from a family that's financially disadvantaged, then we will find a way to make either money available for you so that you can go forward with whatever you're trying to do, or find a way to make those things free and accessible to everyone so that, while sure, there'll be things you can't afford, it'll be none of the things that are necessary to get ahead in life. I have misgivings about Rawls' idea. I mean, I know where Rawls is trying to go, and I kind of like what he's trying to do, but this original position just doesn't exist originally. It's something that's fictive, and I'm not sure that it's ever actually possible for anyone to completely bracket their own situation in the world, especially when we're never sure just what part of our situation in the world might be important to the situation we're talking about. Often, things that we thought were trivial turn out to be important. Often, we find that what we thought was one thing is seen by the world at large as another. I'll never forget sitting in a doctor's office, and a small child had a helium balloon, and they released it and went up into the ceiling. And he was there with his grandmother, and his grandmother looked at the child and said, "Perhaps the tall gentleman will go over and get it for you." I don't know who this tall gentleman is. I'm looking around the room and I'm thinking like, well, nobody here is tall. I mean, I'm just a skosh under 6 feet, okay? I'm not by society standards, tall. But by the standards of the people in the room, and certainly by the standards of this rather diminutive elderly person, I was tall. I would have assessed myself wrongly in the original position. I would have thought I was not tall. I would have been wrong. Just, again, part of the problem with trying to get behind a veil of ignorance is in order to be ignorant, you can't know that you're ignorant if you don't know what you don't know. You can only blunder a lot, but that's not what he's looking for. What he's looking for is an informed awareness of the world coupled with a desire to look past our own situation in the world. And I'm just not sure that might not be a better description than this veil of ignorance thing. Anyway, what we do see here, though, is justice being used to have 3 different kinds of outcomes. We're calling them all justice. The people who wrote them called them justice. If we follow their principles, we will more or less find ourselves being just. But they're not exactly the same thing. Each one has a whole multitude of things that you could be thinking about. You could be talking about, and I hope you are talking about it, and that you'll keep on talking philosophy.